Hello, you're watching Europe and You. Welcome, this time on the programme.
30 years after going to prison, the shipbuilder trying to clear his name. Are you prepared to pay more to travel on a greener boat?
And here in the studio, the £250 billion plan to get the economy moving.
Travelling by ferry has just got a little bit more environmentally friendly, but it's come at a price. Since the beginning of this year, EU law has required all ferries to use low sulphur fuel or be fitted with technology which stops some of the pollutants being released into the air. But the new fuel is 60% more expensive and may result in routes cut and job losses, according to the UK Chamber of Shipping. P&O has already announced that it will raise prices as a result. UKIP's Janice Atkinson believes Europe is being heavy-handed.
We need to be making the laws in our own country. We know what's right for our consumers, we know what's right for our health, and a doesn't fit all across the EU.
Clearly, I don't want anybody to lose their job. Neither do I want to see future generations blighted by air pollution that kills far too many people.
A wall painting outside an Edinburgh church depicting Nigel Farage and Hitler has been criticised by the party. The church has defended the picture as freedom of expression, but the UK Independence Party's Scottish MEP, David Coburn, says it's offensive.
If I were the Bishop of Edinburgh, I wouldn't want to be risking my collection plate that hard-working parishioners have put money into, putting up offensive and possibly libelous paintings.
Still to come.
The Mayor of Bristol on the city's year in the limelight, and why dockers have turned to Europe for justice.
It's been presented as the big idea which will kickstart our economy, a £250 billion fund from the European Union. In fact, the EU is planning to put up £16 billion and hoping private investors will come up with the rest. So will it create new jobs and opportunities as promised? Let's get the views of two MEPs with me now, Labour's Annalisa Dodds, and from the Greens, Molly Scott-Cato. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining me. First of all, to you, Annalisa, is it realistic to raise this much money, talking 250 billion, from capital from the EU of just 16 billion? If I can say just 16 billion, I mean, it's huge amounts of money we're talking about.
It is huge amounts. I mean, I think, first of all, I'd want to say it's fantastic the EU's recognised that you can't have growth without investment. I mean, we've seen so many cuts going on, including in Britain. So fantastic that there is that recognition that investment is needed. If you look at European investments before, like in the European Investment Bank, actually they have been able to leverage quite a lot of private investment. So it does look feasible, but certainly we're going to be scrutinising this plan very, very carefully, because the last thing we want is taxpayers to take all the risk and private investors to get all the benefit. OK,
Molly Scott-Cato, you've got an economics background. Explain the economics in layman's terms. Is it possible to turn 16 billion into 250 billion?
The financial alchemy involved in that does look a little bit dodgy, but I mean, I agree with Annalisa that it's great that we see the Commission moving on from the era of austerity to an era when they realise that there is a public responsibility to invest and to support economies around the Union. But the very high levels of leverage they're looking at, you know, it means bringing in a lot more debt, and unfortunately there's also a taxpayer guarantee along with that. So it does sound suspiciously like the kind of economics that got us into this mess in the first place.
I mean, some people have compared this kind of funding to PFIs, private finance initiatives that we had in the UK, where a lot of the success of that, if I can put it like that, was that we have a lot of new schools, a lot of new hospitals, some of them built under the Labour government. That's not a scheme that the Greens have been very favourable to in the past. If that's what we've got now, that's a warning sign, isn't it?
Well, what we're talking about with PFI is investing in things that the public needs, but bringing private money in and actually huge returns going to the private financiers, which eventually is paid from public funds. So this is a very wasteful way of funding. It's very expensive for taxpayers and we don't get much in return for our money. I mean, what Juncker really needs to do, I think, is look down the back of his own sofa, sort out the problem with tax avoidance in Luxembourg and across the Union, and then there'd be plenty of money to invest in public services and infrastructure.
Okay, Annalisa Dodds, moving on to, what you do once this money is found.
Yeah.
What would be your, if the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, said, Annalisa, how do you want to spend this money? What would be your advice?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important this money goes towards projects that wouldn't be funded otherwise. There are, I think, some good examples we can look at within my own region, the southeast, where the European Investment Bank has been able to support projects that wouldn't have got off the ground otherwise. We've recently seen some big investments in our universities, for example, University of Kent in Canterbury and Medway, lots of new buildings there, supporting new student numbers. Also at the Port of Southampton, very, very big increase in capacity going on, which is backed by European Investment Bank funding. But we can't have a situation where this is just substituting for government funding or for private funding. There's got to be a clear added benefit coming through.
Molly Scott-Cato, where would you like to see this money focused if it materialises?
Well, obviously, as a Green, I'm very concerned that we should invest properly in green infrastructure, in the sort of investment we need to move towards a greener future. Obviously, coming from the southwest, I'm very keen on proper investment in railways. That money is not coming from national government now, despite promises after the Dawlish Railway fell in the sea last year. But I think the worrying thing about this private-public agreement over funding is if something's not profitable, it's not likely to be funded. And that's really problematic because there's an awful lot of public investment that we need that isn't ever going to make a profit for finance companies. And we need political direction over investment, not profit-driven direction.
I mean, the point of this fund is to create new jobs. I mean, Jean-Claude Juncker talks about it kick-starting the economy, putting the jump leads on Europe and creating some miraculous returns. Your political group out here in Europe, Annalisa Dodds, is very supportive of this as a plan. Is it realistic? If you invest money in, like you say, local universities or railways, as you said, Molly Scott-Cato, will the returns be an economic recovery?
Well, I don't believe in miracles necessarily. I think we've got to scrutinise everything very carefully, and that's what we will be doing, and that's what my big group has certainly been doing. I think some of the things that we've been saying are quite important. I mean, at the moment, this programme is just limited to 3 years. I would say actually it needs to be longer term, really, if we're going to see the benefits. Otherwise, you might just have cosmetic changes, which aren't going to have that long-term impact. But I think, some of these areas that have been invested in before really have had a payoff in terms of jobs. Again, going back to that Port of Southampton case, there are 15,000 people employed directly at the port or in jobs related to that port. Now, it's the second biggest port, container port in the UK. It's been able to maintain that position because it's had that kind of investment over time. So I do think this can create jobs, but I think we've got to be realistic at the same time.
The other issue is how long it might take. This fund has to be got up and running. That could take a while. And then, what's the return on the investment you're talking about? Could be years down the line. Europe's economies, including the UK's, is at or near stagnation now and has been for several years.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. And we've seen a lot of measures being taken which have had very negative short-term impact. But over the longer term, successful projects that have been sustainable, they've been well thought through, and actually they've been part of government plans for a long time. Governments across the EU have been asked to identify projects that they want to be funded through this. We've tried to find out what the UK government's saying, and we've not been able to get that information, but I can certainly think of a fair few in my region, projects that are desperately needed: transport, renewable energy, support for research. They're really out there already calling for the funds, so there won't be any problem with identifying projects, that's for sure.
Should this money, Molly Scott-Cato, come from Europe, and what's the advantage of a central pot of money like this? Is there a risk that there could be strings attached?
Well, I think one of the things that we're going to see is actually the money will be focused most on the areas that have suffered most during the recession. So that may mean that actually the countries of Northern Europe don't gain as much from this investment as the countries of Southern Europe. But on the other hand, we are an interconnected economy, so if some of the economies in the Mediterranean part of Europe, for example, start to thrive more, then we will start to see demand for our goods increase. So there's a way in which we are all connected now economically, so I don't think we should be too sort of immediately selfish about where the finance goes.
And picking up on the timescale issue, do you see that as a problem, that it could be years before we see any return on this investment?
I think there's quite a serious risk here that this new Commission is going to rush into projects which it can show to have achieved something but may not necessarily be the best projects. So we're all well aware of the sort of airports in the middle of nowhere and the roads that haven't really been needed. So we don't want to have those vanity grand projet kind of projects which just waste public money, but bureaucrats can say, look, we've done something. So in our green investment plan, we're very much focusing on small enterprises, the kinds of businesses that can really take us forward, focused on energy, focused on the green transition, but businesses which will actually have what we call, as economists, multiplier effects. So you spend that money, it goes through the economy lots of times before it leaves it, and those are the sorts of businesses that will really start to revive the European economy.
Okay, well, those are your warnings and your hopes. We'll see what lies ahead. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining me. Thank you.
A man who was imprisoned for a month following strike action has taken his case to Europe. Eddie Marnell was one of a group of shipyard workers in Liverpool protesting over job losses.
We took action by virtue of the fact that we occupied the yard and the two remaining vessels in the yard, which was a Type 42 destroyer and a jack-up accommodation rig. And this went on for several months. So it eventually, management went to Manchester Crown Court and obtained a writ banning us from the yard based on an ancient law of trespass.
For 30 years, he, with the support of the unions, has been campaigning for an explanation to what they believe was a miscarriage of justice. Now his case has been heard by the Petitions Committee in the European Parliament, and there's been a breakthrough.
On behalf of the Petitions Committee, also write to the UK authorities to at least ask for a formal apology.
Speaking afterwards, Eddie Marnell told us that it was exactly what he was hoping for.
I think to a lot of the families and a lot of the strikers, it will be a case of at least we're getting recognition for what we did and what we went through. And it might be small consolation at the time, but I think it's well worth the fight.
People are owed redundancy. They're actually owed redundancy, so we'd like to see some kind of financial settlement, but mainly we'd like to see somebody acknowledging and apologising for the imprisonment.
A ban on throwing fish back into the sea has not come into force as planned. Celebrity chef Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall led the high-profile fish fight campaign, calling for an end to discards, where fishermen are forced to throw fish away if they don't have the EU quota to catch them.
I think with this spur to action, it'll help them make the right decision in the coming months.
Despite convincing MEPs to back his plan, the technical details have not been finalised in time. The first ban was meant to come into force at the beginning of the year. Labour's Richard Corbett is still confident the ban will soon be in place, but since the election of new MEPs last May, there have been attempts, he says, to try and scupper the plans.
There are some strange parties in some cases that have been elected to this Parliament that are not reliable on matters like this, and it's allowed a rearguard action by those who were not very happy with the rather good reform that we achieved last year to the common fishing policy.
The Conservatives' fisheries spokesman was one of the MEPs who put down amendments. He insists he has helped avoid a longer delay.
If we hadn't acted today, the earliest this proposal would have come in would have been sometime in March, April, possibly even May. That's no use for fishermen. Fishermen need legality to behave within the law.
Bristol is European Green Capital 2015. The city was announced the winner more than a year ago.
Thank you, all of you. Come to Bristol. Celebrate with us.
Now all the preparations are over and the festivities are underway. The Green Capital Prize is designed to recognise cities which are doing something different when it comes to the environment. Bristol claims 90% of its residents are within 300 metres of parks or waterways. One official told me winning the award and putting the city on the map is worth at least £10 million to the local economy. And the mayor says Bristol is already feeling the benefits.
There are lots of jobs in the energy sector. We are an energy hub. We are looking at the saving of energy across the city and also of generating it in a much cleaner fashion. And we've got projects on the go on that already. So I think that it is absolutely about jobs and the economy as much as it is about clean air and the environment.
Thanks for watching Europe and You. Find out more about your MEPs on our website and iPhone app. And for the latest stories, follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I hope you'll join us again. Until then, goodbye.